What if I told you that a single moment of cruelty could transform an entire life? This is Ellie Thompson's story, beginning on a cold November evening at the New York Film Academy. In Suite 7, long after others had gone home, a young woman sits hunched over a computer screen. Her fingers dance across the keyboard with practiced precision. This is Ellie Thompson, 24 years old, wearing her signature oversized hoodie. Her dark hair falls like a curtain across her face, hiding eyes that rarely meet another person's gaze. The clock reads 2:47 a.m. Ellie has been here 14 hours straight, but her work isn't for herself. She's editing someone else's dream, someone else's future. Tomorrow, like every day before, no one will remember her name. Ellie's story began in Syracuse, New York, where her mother worked double shifts as a nurse after her father's death when Ellie was 12. While other teenagers discovered parties, Ellie discovered editing through a broken laptop her neighbor was discarding. She taught herself everything through YouTube tutorials and free software. By junior year of high school, she was better than most film school graduates, but she didn't know that yet. The rejection letter came on a Tuesday. While your technical skills show promise, your portfolio lacks the artistic vision required for our scholarship program. She worked 3 jobs that summer. Donut shop mornings, office cleaning afternoons, freelance editing nights. Every dollar went toward tuition. She failed the entrance exam twice before passing on her 3rd attempt, not from lack of skill, but lack of confidence. Now in her final year, the pattern continued. Ellie worked as a freelance editor for other students, served coffee at sunrise, and cleaned editing suites after midnight. She slept in Suite 7 most nights because it was cheaper than rent. The New York Film Academy's post-production department had its own hierarchy and cruel social dynamics. At the top sat students like Nina Cartwright, whose father owned 3 television stations. Nina had perfect equipment, perfect connections, and perfect confidence that comes from never worrying about rent or groceries. Professor Carter favored students who could articulate their vision in buzzwords and networking events. He barely noticed Ellie, who did her best work in silence. His philosophy: talent without promotion is invisible. Mr. Morris, the equipment keeper, had once been an editor in the 1980s. A scandal had driven him from the industry, but his love for craft never died. He watched Ellie work during late nights, seeing something in her precision that reminded him of himself. Suite 7 was technically for equipment storage, hastily converted from a supply closet. It had an old computer, flickering monitor, and clanking air conditioning, but it was quiet, forgotten, and perfect for someone who preferred working unseen. As graduation approached, pressure intensified. Students who'd coasted on charm suddenly faced reality. Those with money hired external editors. Those with connections called in favors. Those with neither turned to Ellie Thompson. She became the Academy's worst-kept secret. Need audio sync fixed? Ask the quiet girl in Suite 7. Got a lifeless rough cut? Ellie can make it sing. The pattern was always the same. Desperate students, empty promises, Ellie agreeing partly for money, mostly because she couldn't bear seeing good footage ruined. Nina Cartwright's group was different. They didn't ask for help. They demanded it. Nina had assembled the dream team for her thesis film Blackbird, a psychological drama about trauma recovery. The irony wasn't lost on Ellie that Nina, who'd never experienced real hardship, chose to tell a story about overcoming adversity. The film should have been Nina's masterpiece. She had professional cameras, studio-quality sound equipment, even a location budget. But between ambitious vision and final cut, everything fell apart. Pacing dragged, emotional beats fell flat, narrative threads tangled into confusion. 3 weeks before final screening, Nina cornered Ellie after a brutal critique session. I need you to take a look at Blackbird, just a consultation. Ellie watched the rough cut in silence, immediately identifying problems. Opening sequences lingered too long. Dialogue scenes felt conversational rather than revelatory. The climactic breakdown felt mechanical. I can help, but I'll need to restructure the entire 3rd act. Fine, whatever, just make it work. I'll pay you $300. For most students, $300 was spending money. For Ellie, it was 2 weeks of groceries. The transformation of Blackbird took Ellie 6 days and 5 sleepless nights. She didn't just edit Nina's film, she discovered its soul. Every cut served the emotional journey. Every transition advanced the psychological landscape. Every moment of silence carried weight. She restructured the opening to immediately establish the protagonist's internal state. She recut dialogue scenes to focus on subtext rather than exposition. Most importantly, she transformed the climactic breakdown from performance into revelation, using microcuts and sound design to place audiences inside the character's fractured psyche. When Ellie finally rendered the final cut, she felt something rare. Pride. Not shallow satisfaction of completing a job, but deep fulfillment of creating something meaningful. Monday came. Professor Carter screened thesis films for the entire department. When Blackbird began playing, the editing suite fell silent. The opening sequence drew viewers in immediately. Pacing held them captive. By the climactic scene, several students were wiping their eyes. After screening, Professor Carter stood with genuine surprise. "Miss Cartwright, this is exceptional work. The editing demonstrates sophistication and emotional intelligence I haven't seen in student work for years. The way you've constructed the psychological journey through purely visual storytelling is remarkable." Nina basked in praise, accepting congratulations from classmates and professors. She spoke eloquently about her vision and approach to non-linear narrative structure. She thanked her cinematographer, sound designer, lead actress. She mentioned everyone except the person who actually created the magic they'd witnessed. Ellie sat in the back row, invisible as always, watching Nina claim credit for work that had consumed her life for nearly a week. When a fellow student whispered, "I heard you helped with that film," Ellie just shrugged. "I just cleaned up some technical issues." After class, Nina approached with a satisfied smile. "Thanks for the help. Here's your 300. Not bad for some technical cleanup, right?" She handed over cash with casual dismissiveness of someone paying for pizza delivery. "Actually, I completely restructured the narrative. I rebuilt the entire climactic sequence and—" "Look," Nina interrupted, voice sharp with irritation. "I appreciate the work, but let's not get carried away. You helped with some editing. I created the vision. Professor Carter praised my storytelling, not your button pushing." The dismissal hit Ellie like a physical blow. She'd poured her heart into that film, seen something beautiful in Nina's raw footage and given it life. But in Nina's eyes, she was just a technician, invisible even in her own achievement. Word of Blackbird's success spread like wildfire. Nina found herself center of attention, fielding questions about her unique editing approach and innovative narrative structure. She began giving informal lectures about her process, describing techniques she'd never used and theories she'd never studied. Meanwhile, Ellie retreated further into shadows. She stopped eating lunch in common areas, grabbing coffee to work through meal breaks. She avoided editing suites during busy hours, preferring late nights when the building was empty. But attention surrounding Blackbird had unexpected consequences. Professor Carter, impressed by what he believed was Nina's work, began using the film as class example. He would pause at particularly effective cuts and ask Nina to explain her choices. Nina, trapped by her own deception, improvised explanations, ranging from vague to completely incorrect. The rapid cutting during the breakdown sequence creates psychological fragmentation. "Can you walk us through your decision-making process?" Nina, who hadn't been present during Ellie's late-night reconstruction, fumbled for answers. "Well, I wanted to show how trauma fragments memory, so I used fragmented cuts." Ellie, in her usual back row seat, felt each incorrect explanation like a small knife wound. Not only had her work been stolen, but it was being misrepresented. Its careful construction reduced to filmmaking cliches and pseudo-intellectual nonsense. The situation worsened when film industry professionals began visiting for annual senior portfolio review. Working editors, directors, and producers came to identify promising new talent. They watched Nina's film with genuine interest, some requesting copies for future reference. During one screening, veteran editor Sarah Chen paused. the film during Ellie's masterfully constructed breakdown sequence. This editing demonstrates real emotional intelligence. Whoever cut this understands that editing isn't just about pacing, it's about psychology. This editor has genuine instincts. Nina beamed under praise while Ellie sat frozen, watching, her career opportunities being handed to someone else. The breaking point came during the Academy's pre-graduation showcase, where final projects were screened for family, friends, and industry guests. The event was held in the main auditorium with red carpets, professional lighting, and reception afterward for student networking. Ellie had been hired to run technical support, operating projection equipment, managing sound levels, troubleshooting problems. It was a job that paid well but kept her invisible, hidden in the projection booth while others celebrated achievements. As Blackbird began screening, Ellie watched from her booth as the audience fell under its spell. She could see industry professionals taking notes, professors nodding approvingly, Nina's family beaming with pride in the front row. This was the film that would launch Nina's career. Open doors always closed to someone like Ellie. Midway through screening, disaster struck. The digital projector overheated and shut down automatically, plunging the auditorium into darkness. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd as technical staff scrambled to identify the problem. From her booth, Ellie immediately diagnosed the issue. The backup cooling system had failed, and the primary projector would need 20 minutes to cool down. But she knew there was a secondary projection system in the booth, older and less sophisticated, but capable of finishing the screening if someone knew how to quickly transfer and recalibrate files. She watched as the head of technical services consulted with Professor Carter on the auditorium floor. They were discussing cancelling the remainder of the screening, moving to reception early, perhaps rescheduling Nina's film for a smaller venue later. Ellie stood up, hands trembling slightly. She could fix this. She could save the screening, preserve this crucial moment for Nina despite everything between them. It would take 5 minutes to switch systems and recalibrate projection. She started toward the booth's intercom system, ready to offer her solution, when Nina's voice cut through darkness from the auditorium floor. "This is completely unprofessional. I have industry contacts here tonight. This screening could determine my entire future, and you're telling me it might not happen because of technical incompetence." Professor Carter's response was conciliatory but firm. "We're doing everything we can, Nina. These things happen with technology. No, these things happen when you rely on inadequate equipment and inexperienced staff. I specifically asked who would be running tech tonight, and I was told it was some student worker. You're telling me my career might be ruined because you trusted something this important to amateur help?" Ellie's hand froze over the intercom button. In the darkness of the projection booth, she felt the familiar weight of invisibility, but now it carried different meaning. She wasn't just unseen, she was actively unwanted, dismissed before she could even offer to help. From the auditorium, she heard Nina continue. "I don't understand why student workers are even allowed to handle equipment this important. They should have professional technicians for events like this." The cruel irony wasn't lost on Ellie. The person complaining about technical incompetence was the same person who'd claimed credit for technical mastery she'd never possessed. Nina was demanding professional standards while dismissing the very person who could meet them. Ellie sat back down, her offer of help dying in her throat. She watched through the booth window as the crowd grew restless, as Nina's career moment slipped away into darkness, as the evening supposed to launch dreams became a cautionary tale about technology's fragility. In weeks following the failed screening, Nina's prospects dimmed considerably. Industry contacts who'd missed the complete screening showed polite interest but made no concrete offers. Portfolio review sessions that should have led to job interviews resulted in generic encouragement to keep in touch. Nina's frustration found its target in the Academy's technical services, and by extension in Ellie. She complained loudly about the student worker responsible for projection failure, conveniently forgetting that Ellie had run tech support flawlessly for 2 years without incident. Tension came to a head on a grey Thursday afternoon in late April. Nina's group had reserved the main editing suite for final color correction session on Blackbird, hoping to prepare a pristine version. For one last round of festival submissions, Ellie was working late in Suite 7 when she heard raised voices down the hall. Color correction was a specialized process requiring calibrated monitors and professional software. Nina, despite claims of technical expertise, had never learned color grading intricacies. Her attempt to enhance the film's visual palette resulted in a muddy, oversaturated mess that looked processed through a broken Instagram filter. This is impossible. Why does this software have to be so complicated? Can't it just make the colors look better automatically? Her group members offered tentative suggestions, but none had more experience with color correction than Nina. They were actors and writers, not technicians. The specialized knowledge they needed wasn't something that could be improvised. Ellie found herself in familiar position, possessing exact skills needed to solve a problem, but remaining invisible to those who needed help. She'd taught herself color correction during second year, spending countless hours studying online tutorials and practicing on her own footage. She could fix Nina's color issues in under an hour, but after the projection booth incident and weeks of listening to Nina blame incompetent student workers, Ellie remained in Suite 7, focusing on her own work while crisis unfolded down the hall. The argument continued for 20 minutes before the group gave up in frustration. As they packed equipment, Ellie heard Nina's voice one final time. "I swear this place would fall apart without students like us who actually know what we're doing. Thank God we don't have to rely on technical support here." It was in that moment that Ellie made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She was tired of being invisible, tired of watching her skills go unrecognized, tired of saving people who refused to acknowledge she existed. Tomorrow was final portfolio review, where industry professionals would make their last visits before graduation. If Nina wanted to claim credit for work she couldn't actually do, she would have to face consequences when that deception finally caught up with her. For the first time in her academic career, Ellie Thompson decided to let someone else's failure speak for itself. The final portfolio review arrived on a crisp May morning, pregnant with possibility. Industry professionals filled the academy's corridors, their conversations mixing technical jargon with career opportunities. For graduating students, this was their last chance to make an impression, to turn 4 years of education into actual employment. Ellie arrived early, as always, slipping into Building B, while most students were still having breakfast. She had volunteered to help with technical setup, partly for extra money, but mostly because it gave her something to do with her hands while watching other people's dreams either soar or crash. In the main presentation room, she methodically tested. Microphones, calibrated projectors, ensured every technical element would perform flawlessly. Ironic, she thought, that the person Nina had blamed for technical incompetence was the same person ensuring today's presentations would run smoothly. As students began arriving, Ellie retreated to her familiar position in the projection booth. From there she could see everything while remaining essentially invisible. She watched Nina pace nervously near the entrance, her usually perfect hair showing signs of stress, her confident demeanor cracking slightly under the weight of actually having to deliver on her claims. When Nina's turn arrived, she walked to the front with forced confidence. The lights dimmed, and Blackbird began to play. Even from her booth, Ellie could see the audience's immediate engagement. The opening sequence drew them in exactly as she'd designed it to. The emotional progression held them captive. By the climactic breakdown scene, the room was completely silent except for the film's carefully crafted audio design. As credits rolled, the audience erupted in genuine applause. Industry professionals leaned forward in their seats, several making notes in their portfolios. This was the moment Nina had been building toward for 4 years. Sarah Chen, the veteran editor who'd praised the film during her earlier visit, stood up first. That was extraordinary work. The editing demonstrates sophistication that's rare even in professional productions. I'm particularly interested in discussing the psychological cutting during the breakdown sequence. Nina's practiced smile faltered slightly. Thank you, I'm happy to discuss my process. Wonderful. Let's start with your approach to rapid cutting during the protagonist's crisis. The rhythm there is incredibly complex. It feels almost musical. Can you walk us through how you constructed that sequence? From her booth, Ellie watched Nina's face go pale. This was the sequence Ellie had rebuilt from scratch frame by frame during those sleepless nights 6 months ago. It was some of the most intricate editing work she'd ever done, requiring not just technical skill, but deep emotional intuition. Nina cleared her throat. Well, I wanted to create a sense of fragmentation, so I used fragmented cuts. The explanation hung in the air like a deflated balloon. Sarah Chen's eyebrows raised slightly, but she pressed on. I see. And the audio design during that sequence, the way dialogue overlaps and distorts, how did you approach that technically? Another pause. Nina's hands were visibly shaking now. I worked with my sound designer to create layers. Murmur of confusion rippled through the professional audience. These were people who understood the technical complexity of what they'd just witnessed. Nina's vague explanations weren't just inadequate, they were insulting to their intelligence. Marcus Rodriguez, a post-production supervisor from a major New York studio, leaned forward. I'm curious about your color grading choices. The way you've handled contrast between the protagonist's internal and external worlds is very sophisticated. What tools did you use for that level of precision? Nina's pause stretched longer this time. Sweat was visible on her forehead under the presentation lights. I used professional color correction software. Which software specifically? And can you describe your workflow for maintaining consistency across different emotional states? The question was reasonable, even basic for someone claiming professional-level color correction skills. But Nina had no answer, because she'd never successfully completed a single color correction session in her life. The specific technical details, there are so many different approaches. The room was growing uncomfortable. These industry professionals had taken time from busy schedules to identify promising new talent. Instead, they were watching someone who clearly couldn't explain work she claimed to have done. As Nina's humiliation continued in the presentation room below, Ellie found herself facing an unexpected moment of choice. She could end this. She could step forward, reveal the truth, demonstrate her actual knowledge of the techniques Nina was fumbling to explain. She could claim credit for the work that was rightfully hers, but doing so would mean stepping into the light, claiming space she'd never occupied, speaking up in a way that felt foreign to her entire sense of self. For someone who'd spent 4 years perfecting the art of invisibility, the thought of center stage was terrifying. She thought about her mother, working double shifts in Syracuse, proud of her daughter who was graduating from film school. She thought about Mr. Morris, who'd quietly encouraged her work during those late nights in Suite 7. She thought about all the projects where her contributions had gone uncredited, all the problems she'd solved without recognition, all the talents she'd hidden for fear of taking up too much space. Below, Marcus Rodriguez was asking Nina to describe her approach to sound design, another area where Ellie had done extensive uncredited work on Blackbird. Nina's answer was even more vague than her previous responses, a collection of buzzwords that meant nothing to people who understood professional audio post-production. I integrated the soundscape to enhance the emotional landscape of the narrative journey. The industry professionals were now exchanging glances. This wasn't just technical ignorance, it was almost insulting. They'd been brought here to discover new talent, not to watch someone waste their time with elaborate deceptions. Ellie's hands trembled as she gripped the edges of the booth's control panel. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, to let this disaster play out without her involvement. Nina had made her own choices, had claimed credit she hadn't earned, had dismissed and belittled the very person who could have helped her. She deserved whatever consequences followed, but as Ellie watched Nina's dream career crumble in real time, she felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, but sadness. This wasn't justice, it was just waste. Nina's deception was inexcusable, but the industry professionals in that room weren't just losing faith in Nina, they were losing faith in the Academy's ability to produce qualified graduates. More importantly, Ellie realized that her own talents were being wasted in this shadow dance of credit and recognition. She'd spent 4 years perfecting skills that could serve the industry, could tell stories that mattered, could create the kind of emotional connection she'd witnessed in that room when Blackbird played. But her fear of visibility had made her complicit in her own invisibility. Mr. Morris's words came back to her from a conversation months earlier. Don't make my mistake. Don't let fear of recognition keep you from doing the work you're meant to do. Sarah Chen was wrapping up the session, her disappointment barely concealed. Well, thank you for your time, Nina. We'll be in touch if any opportunities arise that might be appropriate. It was a polite dismissal, the kind of professional courtesy that meant don't call us, we won't call you. Nina's career prospects were dying in that moment, but more than that, the sophisticated work that had impressed these professionals was being dismissed as a fluke, an accident, something that couldn't be replicated or built upon. Ellie stood, up in her booth, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. She wasn't going to save Nina's career. That bridge had been burned by Nina's own choices, but she could save her own. She could step forward not as Nina's rescuer, but as her own advocate. The presentation room was in the awkward aftermath of Nina's failed interview. Industry professionals were gathering their materials, making polite exit conversation, clearly ready to move on to more promising prospects. Nina stood frozen at the front of the room, her face a mask of humiliation and dawning realization that 4 years of careful image construction had just crumbled in 20 minutes. Professor Carter was attempting damage control, assuring the industry guests that this wasn't representative of the Academy's usual standards. Perhaps we could move on to our next presenter. It was at that moment that the presentation room door opened quietly, and Ellie Thompson stepped inside. She moved with a purposefulness that seemed foreign to anyone who'd observed her over the past 4 years. Gone was the habitual hunch of her shoulders, the downward cast of her eyes, the careful way she'd always made herself small in spaces occupied by others. She walked directly to the front of the room, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, her usually hidden eyes focused and clear. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room despite its quiet tone. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about the work you just saw." The room fell completely silent. Professor Carter looked confused. Nina's face went from pale to ashen. The industry professionals, who'd been halfway to the door, stopped and turned with curious attention. Sarah Chen, her hand still on her portfolio case, spoke first. "I'm sorry, are you one of the presenters?" "No," Ellie replied, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm the editor who actually cut the film you just watched." The statement landed like a small bomb in the quiet room. Nina made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. Professor Carter's eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. The industry professionals, sensing unexpected drama, returned to their seats with renewed interest. Marcus Rodriguez leaned forward. "I'm sorry, could you clarify that statement?" Ellie opened her laptop and connected it to the presentation system with practiced efficiency. "The film you just saw, Blackbird, was edited entirely by me, Nina. Cartwright shot the footage and directed the performances, but every cut, every transition, every moment of timing you praised, that was my work." "That's not true." Nina's voice cracked as she found her words. "She helped with some technical issues, but the creative vision, the editing choices, those were mine." Ellie turned to face Nina directly, and for the first time in 4 years, Nina saw something in Ellie's eyes she'd never seen before. Absolute certainty. "Nina, you've never successfully completed a color correction session. You don't know the difference between J-cuts and L-cuts. You think fragmented cutting is a technical term because you've never learned actual editing vocabulary." Ellie's voice remained calm, but each word was precise and devastating. "Fio hired me to clean up some technical issues in your film, and I spent 6 days rebuilding it from scratch." She turned back to the industry professionals, her laptop now connected and ready. "I can prove what I'm saying. I kept save files of every stage of the editing process." David Park, his skepticism evident, gestured toward the screen. "Show us." What followed was the most comprehensive demonstration of editing expertise the Academy had ever witnessed. Ellie pulled up Nina's original rough cut, competent but unremarkable, conventionally cut, emotionally flat. This was Nina's original. Edit, Ellie explained. Technically sound but without emotional sophistication. Now watch what I did. She showed her restructuring of the opening sequence, her reworking of dialogue scenes, her complex cutting during the breakdown sequence. But she didn't just show the work. She explained it with technical precision and creative insight that Nina had been unable to demonstrate. The industry professionals listened with growing amazement. This was a masterclass in advanced editing technique. Sarah Chen interrupted. Wait, you're saying you did all of this work, and you're not credited as the primary editor? I'm not credited at all, Ellie replied simply. I was paid $300 as a technical consultant. The room erupted in murmurs of disbelief and outrage. Marcus Rodriguez stood up, his voice sharp with anger. Let me understand this correctly. You created work sophisticated enough to impress working professionals, and you were paid what most editors charge per hour. Sarah Chen was the first to break the uncomfortable silence. Ellie, can you walk us through your decision-making process for the breakdown sequence? The technical explanation we didn't get earlier. What followed was a revelation of both technical expertise and artistic vision. Ellie described her approach with the precision of a master craftsperson. The character's psychological break happens in stages, she explained, manipulating the timeline. First, there's the trigger moment. I held that in a long take to establish reality before the fracture. Then rapid cuts between her face and the stimulus, getting faster to show escalating panic. She demonstrated memory cuts, audio layering, and how the visual cuts were choreographed to the character's breathing pattern. David Park was taking notes furiously. That's incredibly sophisticated. You're essentially editing the character's internal state. Exactly. The breakdown isn't happening to her, it's happening inside her. The editing needed to place the audience in that internal experience. What happened next was unprecedented. Sarah Chen stood up and addressed Ellie directly. I'm going to be blunt. In 15 years of post-production, I've met maybe 3 editors who combine technical sophistication with emotional intelligence at your level. I'm offering you a position at our studio, starting immediately after graduation. Marcus Rodriguez followed immediately. Our studio is developing a new division focused on independent films with complex narrative structures. I'd like you to consider leading that division. David Park made his own pitch. I'm starting pre-production on a psychological thriller that needs exactly your editing approach. I'd like you as primary editor, with full creative credit. Within 10 minutes, Ellie had gone from invisible student worker to one of the most sought-after graduating students in academy history. But the most meaningful moment came when Mr. Morris approached the group. I'm just the equipment keeper here, but I've watched this young woman work for 2 years. She's been here every night until past midnight, perfecting her craft. What you're seeing today is the result of dedication that most people in this industry will never match. His endorsement carried unexpected weight, unlocking something in Ellie. For the first time since entering the room, she smiled, not tentatively, but confidently. Marcus Rodriguez extended his hand. When can you start? Before Ellie could answer, Sarah Chen interrupted. Actually, there's something else. That personal film you mentioned, I'd like to help you finish it for festival submission. Ellie looked around at faces focused on her with respect and professional interest. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was being courted by industry professionals who understood her work. The most satisfying moment came when she turned to Nina, who'd been standing frozen throughout the entire reversal. Nina, Ellie said quietly, you're a talented director. You don't need to claim other people's work to succeed. You just need to find collaborators who complement your strengths. Sarah Chen, overhearing, addressed Nina directly. That's excellent advice. We're always looking for directors who understand their strengths and know how to build effective teams. In that moment, what could have been Nina's career destruction became an opportunity for both women to find their proper places in the industry. The presentation room gradually emptied as industry professionals and students moved toward the reception, but the conversation continued around Ellie with unprecedented intensity. For someone who'd spent 4 years avoiding attention, She was now the center of a professional whirlwind that felt both exciting and overwhelming. Sarah Chen was already making phone calls on Ellie's behalf, setting up meetings with potential collaborators and festival contacts. "I'm serious about helping you finish that personal film," she said between calls, "but I also think you should consider developing a documentary series about under-recognized talent in creative industries. Your story today isn't unique. There are probably hundreds of people with similar experiences." The suggestion sparked immediate interest from David Park. "That's a brilliant concept. We could structure it around different creative fields: editing, sound design, cinematography, even writing. Show the gap between who gets credit and who actually does the work." Marcus Rodriguez, who'd been quiet while making his own calls, rejoined the conversation with news. "I just spoke with my business partner. We want to fast-track our offer. We're prepared to give you a 2-year contract with creative control over your projects, plus profit participation and festival submission support." For Ellie, who'd been living paycheck to paycheck for 4 years, the financial security alone was transformative, but the creative freedom being offered was beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Professor Carter, who'd been watching these developments with a mixture of amazement and chagrin, approached Ellie with what appeared to be genuine humility. "Ellie, I owe you an apology. I completely failed to recognize what was happening in my own classroom, but more than that, I failed to create an environment where students like you felt comfortable sharing their work." He paused, clearly struggling with the magnitude of the oversight. "I'd like to ask you to help me redesign the curriculum to prevent this from happening to future students." The request was significant, an acknowledgement that the program's focus on self-promotion and networking had created blind spots that could hide genuine talent. But it also represented an opportunity for Ellie to influence the next generation of film students. "I'd be honored to help," she replied, "but I think the changes need to go deeper than curriculum. Students need to feel safe being vulnerable in their work, and that requires changing how we talk about success and failure in creative fields." Mr. Morris, who'd been quietly observing the transformation of Ellie's circumstances, stepped forward with a small wrapped package. "I have something for you," he said, his gruff voice unusually gentle. "I've been saving this for the right moment." Inside the package was a vintage editing manual from the 1970s, its pages marked with decades of handwritten notes. But tucked inside the cover was something more precious, a letter of recommendation, written on professional letterhead, detailing Ellie's skills and character from the perspective of someone who'd watched her work for 2 years. "I wrote this 6 months ago," Mr. Morris explained. "I was planning to give it to you at graduation, but I think you need it now." The letter was extraordinary, a detailed professional assessment of Ellie's technical skills, work ethic, and creative vision from someone whose industry credentials, while not widely known, were impeccable. It was the kind of recommendation that could open doors even without the morning's dramatic revelations. The weeks following the portfolio review passed in a blur of new experiences and rapidly changing circumstances. Ellie's transformation from invisible student to industry prospect created ripple effects throughout the academy that would be felt for years. Her first day at Sarah Chen's post-production studio was both thrilling and terrifying. She arrived early, as always, but instead of slipping in unnoticed, she was greeted by name and escorted to a professional editing suite equipped with technology she'd only dreamed of using. The project assigned to her was a complex documentary about climate change refugees, exactly the kind of emotionally challenging material that required her specialized approach to empathy editing. As she began working with the footage, she realized that all those nights in Suite 7, all those years of developing her techniques in isolation, had been preparation for exactly this kind of work. Her editor's suite was on the 3rd floor, with windows overlooking the Hudson River. It was a far cry from the basement editing room where she'd spent the past 4 years, but the real difference was psychological. For the first time in her adult life, she was working under her own name, building her own reputation, making creative decisions that would be credited to her. The documentary editing process became a masterclass in collaborative filmmaking. The director, an experienced professional named Rosa Martinez, had initially been skeptical about working with someone so young and inexperienced. But as Ellie began crafting the narrative from hundreds of hours of raw footage, Rosa's skepticism transformed into genuine respect. "I've never worked with an editor who understands subtext the way you do," Rosa told her, after reviewing the first cut. "You're not just arranging footage, you're finding the emotional truth underneath the facts." The collaboration extended beyond editing. Ellie's insights about visual psychology influenced shooting decisions for remaining interviews. Her understanding of trauma responses helped Rosa conduct more effective conversations with subjects who'd experienced displacement and loss. Meanwhile, her personal film project was taking on new dimensions with professional support. Sarah Chen had connected her with a trauma counselor who specialized in working with artists, ensuring that the deeply personal material was handled responsibly. The technical resources available allowed Ellie to realize visual ideas she'd been imagining for months, but couldn't execute with student equipment. The film was evolving into something larger than a personal statement. It was becoming a meditation on grief, memory, and healing that spoke to universal experiences while maintaining the intimate specificity that made it powerful. 3 months after graduation, Ellie returned to the Academy for a special screening of her completed personal film. The event had been organized by Professor Carter as part of the new curriculum launch, but it had evolved into something larger, a celebration of the kind of authentic storytelling the program was now committed to fostering. The screening was held in the main auditorium, the same space where Nina's presentation had nearly ended in disaster months earlier. But now the atmosphere was completely different. Students, faculty, and industry professionals filled the seats, united by genuine curiosity about the work, rather than competitive networking anxiety. As Ellie introduced her film, she looked out at an audience that included many of the people who'd shaped her journey. Mr. Morris sat in the front row, his usual gruff expression softened by obvious pride. Sarah Chen and Marcus Rodriguez were there, along with several other professionals who'd become collaborators and mentors. Nina was there too, sitting near the back, but clearly engaged. In the months since graduation, Nina had found her own path. As a director, working with editors who complemented her strengths rather than trying to replicate skills she didn't possess. The experience of having her deception exposed had been painful, but ultimately liberating. She no longer had to pretend to be someone she wasn't. When Ellie's film began playing, the auditorium fell silent in a way that indicated genuine absorption rather than polite attention. The 20-minute piece took viewers through the landscape of grief with unflinching honesty, but without exploitation, using the sophisticated editing techniques she'd developed to create understanding rather than sympathy. The film's climax showed Ellie herself at age 12, learning to edit as a way of processing her father's death. The young girl who'd turned to technology for comfort had grown into an artist who used that same technology to help others navigate their own emotional landscapes. As the credits rolled, credits that included extensive acknowledgements of everyone who'd supported the project, the audience responded with the kind of sustained applause that indicated genuine impact rather than mere appreciation. During the Q&A session that followed, students asked questions that revealed how deeply the film had affected them, but the most meaningful moment came when a young freshman raised her hand. "I've been doing uncredited work for other students because I need the money," she said, her voice barely audible. "After seeing your film and hearing your story, I want to know how to protect myself while still helping others." Ellie's response became an impromptu masterclass in professional boundaries, fair collaboration, and self-advocacy. But more than that, it was a passing of wisdom from someone who'd learned these lessons the hard way to someone who might not have to. After the screening, as the crowd moved to the reception, Ellie found herself in conversation with current students who saw her not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that authentic talent could find its way to recognition. Several students approached her with their own stories of hidden work and uncredited contributions, creating an informal support network that would extend far beyond that evening. The most surprising moment came when Professor Carter announced that the Academy was establishing the Ellie Thompson Fellowship for Collaborative Excellence, a program that would provide financial support and professional development for students who excelled at uncredited collaborative work while developing their own artistic voices. This fellowship exists, Professor Carter explained to the gathered crowd, because we learned that some of our most talented students were hiding in plain sight. We never want that to happen again. 1 year after graduation, Ellie stood before an audience at the Sundance Film Festival, preparing to introduce a documentary series that had grown out of her original personal film. Hidden Hands, the Uncredited Artists Who Shape Our Stories, had become a festival sensation, drawing attention to the systemic issues of recognition and credit in creative industries. The series featured 6 episodes, each focusing on a different creative field where talented individuals often worked without recognition. There was the sound designer, whose work elevated blockbuster films but remained anonymous to audiences, the script doctor who saved troubled productions but whose contributions were contractually invisible, and the costume designer whose vision defined entire genres but rarely received critical attention. But the series was more than an exposé of industry inequities. It was a celebration of dedication, craftsmanship, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from work done well regardless of public recognition. Each episode used Ellie's empathy editing techniques to help audiences understand not just what these artists did, but why they chose to do it despite the lack of conventional rewards. As Ellie looked out at the Sundance audience, a mix of industry professionals, critics, and fellow filmmakers, she felt the profound satisfaction of work that had found its proper context. The scared girl who'd hidden in Suite 7 had become a voice for other hidden talents, someone who could speak truth to power precisely because she understood what it felt like to be powerless. When I started making films, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed theater, I thought the goal was to become visible, to step out of the shadows and claim recognition for my work. What I learned is that the real goal is much more complex. It's about creating work that serves the stories that need to be told, regardless of who gets credit. She paused, looking directly at the camera, recording her remarks. But that doesn't mean accepting exploitation, or allowing fear to keep you silent when silence serves no one. There's a difference between choosing invisibility for artistic reasons and having invisibility imposed on you by systems that don't value your contributions. The distinction was crucial, and one that had emerged from her year of working in professional contexts where her contributions were valued and credited. She'd learned that true artistic humility was different from self-imposed invisibility, born of fear and conditioning. The artist featured in this series taught me that recognition isn't about ego, it's about accountability. When we know who creates the work we love, we can support their future projects. When talent remains hidden, we lose the opportunity to nurture and develop the voices that could shape our cultural future. Her remarks were followed by a panel discussion that included several of the artists featured in the series. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Nina Cartwright, now a successful director in her own right, joined the panel via video link from a film set in Montreal. I want to address something directly, Nina said, her image appearing on the large screen behind the panelists. A year ago, I claimed credit for Ellie's work because I was afraid that my own contributions weren't valuable enough to stand on their own. That fear made me complicit in a system that devalues collaboration and honesty. Her confession was unnecessary. The story was well known in industry circles by now, but her willingness to address it publicly demonstrated the kind of personal growth that the series celebrated. Working with proper collaborators over the past year has taught me that my skills as a director are actually enhanced when I work with editors whose expertise exceeds my own. The shame I felt about needing help was preventing me from creating the best possible work. As the Sundance screening concluded and the audience moved toward the reception, Ellie found herself surrounded by people whose stories echoed her own. Young filmmakers who'd been working in supporting roles, hoping for recognition. Established professionals who'd never received appropriate credit for career-defining contributions. Industry veterans working to change the systems that perpetuated these problems. But the conversation that stayed with her came from an unexpected source. A teenage girl, probably no more than 16, approached her during the reception with a notebook filled with technical diagrams and artistic sketches. "I'm not in film school yet," the girl said, her voice quiet but determined. "But I've been teaching myself editing and sound design using online tutorials. I've been afraid to show my work to anyone because I don't have proper training or expensive equipment." She opened her notebook to reveal storyboards and editing plans that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of visual storytelling. The work was rough around the edges, but showed genuine insight and creativity. "After watching your series," the girl continued, "I realized that waiting until I feel qualified enough to share my work might mean waiting forever. I want to start collaborating with other young filmmakers, but I want to do it in a way that's fair and honest from the beginning." Ellie spent 20 minutes looking through the girl's notebook, offering technical suggestions and encouragement. But more importantly, she connected the teenager with other young filmmakers at the festival, helping to establish the kind of collaborative relationships that could nurture talent rather than exploit it. As she watched the girl walk away with new contacts and renewed confidence, Ellie realized that this moment represented the true measure of success, not the festival screenings or industry recognition, but the opportunity to ensure that other talented people didn't have to navigate the same obstacles she'd faced. The series had accomplished something beyond its immediate artistic goals. It had started conversations about fair collaboration, appropriate credit, and the responsibility that established professionals had to mentor emerging talent. Film schools were beginning to incorporate discussions about professional ethics and collaborative relationships into their curricula. Perhaps most significantly, the series had given voice and visibility to artists who'd been working in shadows not by choice, but by circumstance. The sound designer featured in episode 3 had been offered her first solo project credit. The script doctor from episode 5 had been hired as a consulting producer, with full acknowledgement of his contributions. As Ellie prepared to leave the festival, she received a text message from Mr. Morris, who'd been following the coverage of her Sundance premiere from his retirement home in upstate New York. "Watch the live stream of your panel discussion," the message read. "Your father would be proud. You've become the artist you were always meant to be, someone who serves the work and serves others. That's the highest achievement in any creative field." The message carried the weight of recognition from someone who'd watched her develop her craft during those long nights in Suite 7. Mr. Morris had seen her potential before she'd been able to see it herself, and his quiet support had been crucial to her eventual emergence into professional recognition.